like to call to order the Town of Southborough, Massachusetts, Neary Building Committee Sustainability Subcommittee meeting. It is 1:05 p.m. We do have a quorum. We're hoping our third member will join soon. Really, the first order of business is, I think, to turn this over to Arrow Street to review the LCCA, the life cycle cost analysis from the HVAC engineers.
Correct.
And if I'm correct about that, then I'm turning it over, and take it away.
Great. So we sent the full report, and hopefully you had a chance to look through it. I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, I have to just be given permission to share. Okay. Can you guys see that? Like the picture of the aerial view?
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
I think you have to click the button again. Now on the bottom, yeah.
Okay, you can see the now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I'm just gonna quickly go through where we are today. Everything in gray is everything we've already done, and we are essentially at this point here, the economic engineering assessment that GGD did, which is a combination of cost estimating that PM&C did, as well as energy modeling, and then a life cycle cost assessment. And so that's what we're going to go over today. So basically, we're going to give you the results. Well, you've already seen the report, but we're going to go through that in more detail. And then from here, this kind of gets us towards the end of schematic design, looking for the final system design selection from the committee. So we're not looking for that today, but we're looking for that to finish up schematic design. Just to remind everyone, there were three HVAC options that were studied. The first option one was a VRF system. The second one was a ground source heat pump system. And the third one was essentially the air to water heat pump chiller heating plant with electric boiler. The reason why they were in this order really was based on the fact that VRF is the lowest construction cost. And so therefore the other two systems are compared back to that. They weren't, 1, 2, and 3 was not based on order of preference. It's just the comparison. And just the note that it says at the bottom, the EUI of 25 is what we consider a net zero building. So the energy use is that or less, which really is just option 2. And that translates also to the Mass Save incentive program that requires that EUI achievement of 25 or less for that Path 1 incentive. That's what we went over. I think it was in November, the last time the subcommittee met. We talked about the incentives with the National Grid. I'm gonna actually jump out of this and zoom in a little bit more, so you can see a little bit bigger. Those are the three options: VRF, ground source, and the air source systems. The chart or the multiple pages of charts that you saw in GGD's report, I've just kind of pulled out some of that information and summarized it here. So first is just sort of more qualitative components, the energy use, intensity of them. We looked at indoor air quality, thermal comfort, acoustics, service life, and maintenance or ease of maintenance. So these are just sort of a compare them against each other, sort of the consumer reports, if you will. All systems are kind of good, and that's the dashed, where the filled in circle is the best in that particular quality that we're looking at. When we talked about this a little bit back in June, which you may remember, but I'll refresh your memory, just kind of like why some of them are different. Under indoor air quality, that's really just based on the option 2 and 3, which have the displacement delivery of the air system of the ventilation versus the overhead. And that's really what plays into the indoor air quality and the thermal comfort of why there's differences between them. The displacement sense system generally has better air quality just because it's delivering down an occupied zone. and being stratified and pulled out at the top where the VRF system is supplying air overhead, and pushing that ventilation down. And so that really is why there's a difference on the VRF side with the indoor air quality and thermal comfort. The air quality is going to be good. The filtration, the ventilation, outside air is, going to be very good at air quality. There just is that little bit of difference between the displacement versus the overhead. And then similarly, the acoustics is very similar as well. You have those basically fan coil unit, the terminal units for the VRF system. There's more mechanized or motorized parts in there. And so, and you're also supplying at a higher velocity because you're supplying overhead. So there's some acoustics there that are more noticeable than they would be for the other systems. And so that's why that gets the lower comparative to the other systems. And the service life ease and maintenance are also very sort of similar. You have a lot more components to maintain in each individual space because of those terminal units being in all of the spaces. And then the plant system, if you will, the VRF, the outdoor units and things like that need to be replaced more often. So that's just why they have the lower ratings for the service life and the ease of maintenance. Any questions about the systems themselves before we go into the?
I have a couple.
Okay.
So on that chart, I'm looking over at the capital investment column.
Yep, we're gonna get there. Do you have any questions on the qualities?
Okay. All right, fine. I'll skip that. So so then the way I see this, the legend, if you will, the bold circle is somewhere in between best and not so good is right.
Well,
So,
right. You can see the chart is good is the lowest because in terms of air
Okay.
quality, thermal comfort, acoustics,
Okay.
none of this is bad, right? Like it's all, so we start that as the dash circle is good. The bold unfilled circle is kind of in between. So that sort of good, better, best is how you
Got
can
it.
read.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, but the fact that it's in the middle, which means it's better, it doesn't necessarily mean it's halfway better, right? I mean, it's just somewhere
No,
in
it's
between, right?
right.
Okay, fair enough.
It's
Thank you.
qualitative, it's not quantitative in that way.
Got it. Thank you.
The only question I would have is the ground source and air source. Wouldn't they almost be similar with outside of the plant or delivery method of, obviously of the equipment in the ground and versus a air source heat pump, but terminal devices, air handlers are all going to be air handlers and VAV boxes, correct? So ease to maintain should almost be similar, but I guess having the chiller component would add another layer, another factor onto that, but those systems almost should be close, right? For acoustics and.
So I don't know, Sean or Keith, if you wanted to talk to that, I'll just say that the main difference there is that there are VAV boxes, right, or option 3, but you're not gonna have filters and as much maintenance in every single room. And so that's really the main kind of difference between the VRF and the air source heat pump.
Yeah, I was just looking at ground source and air source. Obviously, the VRF, you're gonna have washable filters and units, but the VAVs, there should be less maintenance. I think the estimate had 100 boxes in each of the proposed scenarios for ground source and air source. So from a maintenance standpoint, there's much to do on the terminal boxes.
Yeah, I'd just like to answer your question on that. And you're absolutely correct that the ground source and air source, everything within the spaces and air handlers, that will be identical, and both systems will provide displacement ventilation. So they would actually both be bold for the thermal comfort. That would be identical.
Okay.
The ease of maintenance is slightly better for the ground source just because you now have indoor heat pump chillers, where the air source has an exterior one. So being outside exposed to elements, yeah, there's a little more maintenance to that than what you would have with the geothermal system.
So you're saying, Keith, that should be a solid with a split down the middle if we go with consumer prices, right? Or consumer reports.
Yes, if there was a half bill.
Yeah.
Half bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the way that Katie has it right there for easy, that's perfect right there, because I mean, essentially you look at these, if they were on a 1 to 10 rating, you're probably looking at the bold filled in being a 10, the open circle being a 9, and the good being an 8. These are all very high performance systems. Just little slight differences.
And then the next section of the chart is really looking at sort of the operation and maintenance, so the annual costs as well as the lifetime on the replacement. And then the ROI, which is the capital investment and sort of what the payback is. So in the middle section here, I'm showing the annual energy cost. I'm doing this on a square foot basis. We also have a chart in the next page with the total values if you want to see that as well. Sometimes that gets to be so many numbers that it's hard to kind of see them against each other. But so this one's just cost per square foot for these pieces. And then just so you can kind of more easily compare them against each other, we're just using red, yellow, and green to kind of show like what's the high, medium, and low. And obviously for the cost, the green is lower and red is higher. But for payback, it's the opposite. But so you can see the annual energy cost, the annual maintenance cost, and there was backup in the report of like what those maintenance costs were. The savings, of course, they're comparing against option 1. So you're just seeing the savings for the systems 2 and 3 versus 1, and then the lifetime replacement for the equipment in that column. And then on the right-hand side, we have the capital investment. That's the estimated cost. And the payback column, you can see that neither systems 2 or 3 have a payback. And this is a 50-year assessment. So it's looking at it over 50 years. The second block here is showing with the mass save incentive. And then the third option is showing with the mass save incentive as well as the federal incentive, which is only for the ground source system. So that's why that number changes, but the 1 and 3, their numbers don't change. And so you can see that with both incentives, the mass save, the state incentive, and the federal incentive, you do have an instant payback for the ground source system, where you don't see any payback within 50 years between options 2 and 3 versus 1 in any other scenario.
Well,
Any questions about that? Does that make sense? Here, I'm just trying to.
I do have one anyway. So just to be clear, I think you were clear. When you talk about the annual savings column, you're talking about savings compared to option 1, right?
Correct.
So
Everything is compared to option 1.
right. So the larger savings number of whatever the middle one is,
Ground source.
your ground source, I'm sorry. So the savings are basically twice as large there as the air. I can't quite see it, but
And the air source, which is the bottom one, yes.
okay, so that's the most significant. I got it. Thanks.
Any other questions? We can also flip to the chart that has the total prices as opposed to the price per square foot. If that's useful. But basically, you can see the capital investment, the ground source system is the most expensive. 83 for a VRF, which is the least expensive, and 120 for the ground source. And with the incentives, both the mass save and the federal incentive, that's what kind of brings that down, where the energy savings that you'll see, because it is the most efficient system, can't really overcome the capital investment costs without those incentive programs.
Okay.
So this is just looking at that same chart with the total values as opposed to the cost per square foot.
Well, everything continues to point at the ground source, right? As far as net in the end.
Not in the end with both the state and the federal incentives, you know, that is you're gonna see instant payback on that. Whereas without those incentives, you wouldn't see that payback over the 50 years.
Chris, do you have any, I guess, reason to think that my comment about everything pointing to the ground source is maybe either naive or incorrect, or are you?
No, if we didn't have the incentives, I don't think it would be, you know, it would definitely put it out of touch from a installation cost standpoint, but the incentives, everything points to, in my opinion, go ground source. VRF or runner up would be air source, and then obviously third would be VRF, and I think that's how we kind of graded these systems from day one, when we narrowed down to the three. And I think as a group, Arrow Street, as well, you know, I think we came to that conclusion. That's why we stuck with those and modeled those. I think from my personal opinion, you know, VRF, there's a ton of downstream mechanical equipment. You're gonna have all the refrigeration infrastructure and piping. Those refrigeration codes and standards are changing with new refrigeration coming out. By the time we build this, we're gonna be into what they're calling a low GWP refrigerant, and it's gonna be, you know, a couple of years into the market. They've been used all over Europe for plenty of years, but ground source has been around a long time. It was big a while back. Now it's coming back with all the incentives and the reducing your greenhouse gases and emissions. It's just the upfront cost of the wells. You're down to, I look at, you know, down the road for replacement. If we went air source heat pump, like Keith said, you have a piece of refrigeration equipment that's outside in New England, that's operating year round. The weather, working out in the cold takes a toll on the equipment. Ground source, you're gonna have indoor equipment. We're gonna have some redundancy built in, because I'm sure they're gonna have multiple heat pumps due to sizing. So if you had a failure, you can change out one heat pump. You can plant in 20 years. That year 15, hey, let's start renewing heat pumps. If we have 10 of them, maybe we start changing out two of them each year. I've done that at several higher educational facilities where we have heat pumps installed that we actually did throughout the years, where they switched from manufacturers, from Climate Master to a Johnson Controls product, and they switched them out over the years so they could spread out their capital money throughout multiple years. I just think at the end of the day, the upfront cost is a lot. Yes, incentives help, but from an annual energy savings, maintenance, and equipment standpoint, you're getting the best air delivery. You're getting the best probably comfort control, the maintenance standpoint with the geothermal. And if we're going to go geothermal, we go air source. That'd be my recommendation.
Okay, I mean, certainly makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm, you know, obviously much less expert in this for sure.
Because at the end of the day, and you know, VRF is great. It's being used everywhere. But at the same time, with putting in the system, you're Be able to get some infrastructure in there if you ever decided to change out the systems down the road. You're not also stuck with a refrigeration infrastructure. You're gonna have some mechanical piping. You're gonna have air handlers that you can use. I don't know if, are we doing the VAVs with electric reheat? Is that where we landed?
No, you wouldn't have electric reheats. They would
Yeah,
just be,
Hot water
can you
coolers?
hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. So yeah, you would have VAV terminal units, and it would just be a box modulating airflow based on temperature, CO2, and humidity.
Okay,
And then within the space, you would have chilled and heating radiant panels
okay.
taking care of the trim heat and cooling.
So those would be my, and that's for both scenarios, geo and air source? You're gonna have radiant panels with boxes just being the, like, modulating dampers? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so it would be geo 1, air source 2, VRF 3.
I will just point out with the mass save incentive that we calculated in here, we just have the end of construction amount that you'd get, so we're not including the verification, but there is another $150,000 of verification incentive if you go through the 12 months and verify that you're meeting that 25. So we'd expect that you'd go through that, but we just didn't, it doesn't change the payback number. That doesn't make that come in alignment. And we were just being a little more conservative with just showing sort of with the design incentive versus the operations incentive.
And that's an easy lift, right? That's not post-commission in CX, that's through mass save.
Yeah, so it's through mass save, but it is, so we would expect that you'd finish the construction, finish the commissioning, and then you'd trigger your 12 months, probably within 6 months of opening. So within 6 months of occupancy, you would trigger that, and then you'd go through that verification. You do have to monitor throughout and have a quarterly report and then a final report showing. And obviously, if it's not on track and those reports, you'd look at it and figure out like what's going on, if there's something that's not as expected. And then you'd have that final report. So we talked a little bit about the incentives at the NBC meeting. I feel like that was December 6th, something like that.
Yeah.
I did update the incentives just based on these final numbers from the modeling and from the final or the SD estimate. So I did update these as well. They're going to look fairly similar. The cost of the system is actually lower. I want to say it's 600,000 or something lower than the previous estimate. And so the numbers just look a little bit different. Plus the tonnage through the energy model is a little bit less and correct 200 tons now for the heating capacity. So that's a little bit different. So that the mass save numbers derive from that tonnage. And so they'll look fairly similar, but I did update these as well. And I'm just showing the ground source and the BRF. The air source would be very similar to the BRF. The incentive is almost exactly the same. And the construction cost is somewhat similar.
And the geothermal numbers have the wells, I believe the wells had were included in the estimate, right?
Yes, yep. And that's for the top line, that's the federal incentive. So you can see it only exists for the ground source. There's no federal incentive for BRF or air source.
And did we confirm the quantity and amount of wells that we need? I think his estimate had 60.
So I don't remember if we re-estimated how many with the 200 tons. If we
That's the only thing that I saw is maybe something to look at, because I think, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, the wells, one well's like 1 ton of heat rejection at 500 feet?
No. We estimated 12 Well, give me one sec. I'm just trying to pull it up. Yeah.
Depends on, yeah, the size and depth of the well, right?
We estimated 60 at 4.5 tons each.
4.5 tons each.
Yeah, and they were estimated being 650 deep to get that extra capacity out of them.
Sometimes people, we don't include the MSBA portion in the cost. We're just showing the full cost of construction because obviously the rate is the same regardless of the system. I don't know exactly what the final rate's going to be, but I also just put that in it as a line item because sometimes people ask about that. Well, how much are we actually going to pay in the end? Of course, all of the incentives are reimbursements, after construction is complete. But this just kind of shows you an approximate portion if it was at 24% for the MSBA reimbursement. And again, there's no difference between systems and what's covered. That's pretty much all I have unless you have other questions.
Any other questions, Chris?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
You sent the entire report.
Yes, I sent the whole report, and we obviously we'll give you the summary slides as well.
So if anyone has questions on the details of the report, maybe simplest to just email them along.
fair enough.
That was pretty detailed. Thank you. There's a lot of information there.
Hmm.
Well, so it sounds like, from the large group that is this committee today, it sounds like we're unanimous, at least as far as, staying with the fact that what the geothermal is really the best approach. I don't recall, I sometimes turn to Jason if he's around on this, whether there's any vote required from this subcommittee, or this is really just, we'll report, at the next, NBC that we agree that this is the best approach. And then they actually take the vote, I think.
Yeah, I think we'd have to vote of the group and just as direction for Arrow Street and design consultant to move forward with design with geothermal.
Yeah, I don't think technically that there's any quote decision until the full NBC would vote on this. But geothermal makes sense. Good work.
Andrew shot me a note about, something to consider about future expansion if, he saw an article about the district geothermal that was installed in Framingham. And possibilities of, if we have the field space to, in the future, maybe put in some infrastructure down the road. I don't think we could do it as part of this project, but for to do Trottier as well as geothermal down the road, or any other, if there's any other possibilities of expanding on the system. So he may talk about that in the next meeting as well.
We're meeting on Monday with the
Right.
full building committee, right?
Yep.
Correct. Yep.
And I think we're planning to do a similar, perhaps a little quicker summary of this presentation for the group on Monday. Yeah, I think if you think about future for Trottier, it's an interesting question because presumably you'd have the number of wells Trottier would need. And I'm not sure there's much to say, well, we could have one plant supporting two schools, given the distance apart they are. I don't know, Keith or Sean, if you guys have any thoughts on future planning that might be helpful to think through. It feels like if Trottier goes the direction someday in the future, it just has its own geothermal system.
Yeah, we don't I don't know if you guys wanted to add to that, like for other projects where there's a diversity of uses, those sometimes complement each other. So if you have like an office building and a residential building and say a school, which we do have one master plan we're doing with that, like there's more coordination, and sometimes you can eliminate some of the wells that you might have if you just looked at each one individually, but both being schools, I don't see that they would necessarily reduce the number of wells, and the plants would be would be distinct for each building.
Right, and that's kind of what I was telling, what I'd mentioned is, just the amount of cost of the infrastructure to go up to Trotter, you probably just put the wells out in front of the lacrosse field in front of Trotter. And
Yeah.
just, the amount of piping run it would take to get up there would outweigh itself, so, but it, he may bring it up, but I think he was on board with the geo as well, so.
Okay. Anything else?
I'm good.
So next on the agenda is public comment. I'm looking out there. I don't see a hand up. Is there any other business that any of us would want to bring to the meeting today? Okay. Kate, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone, okay, for this. Really very good. I don't recall if I actually, when I opened the meeting, mentioned the date. I know I mentioned the time, but the date is Thursday, January 2nd. And would certainly entertain a motion to adjourn. You'd like to?
Second bit.
All right, so move to adjourn. It's been seconded. Roll call vote, Chris.
Aye.
And I vote aye. We are adjourned at 1:37 PM. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.
Good day.